Okay, massive ramble through the women who achieved something or other. Okay. Blanche Stuart Scott, 1884 to 1970, first woman to fly an aeroplane. Forget Amelia Earhart or whatever. Um, she was quite an adventurous. In 1910, she drove from uh, New York to San Francisco uh, with a journalist recording this. She was the first woman to drive across America. Um, and as a result of this, she sort of became quite well known at the time. She was offered flying lessons, and being the intrepid girl that she was, she took them up, and so she came to be the first woman to fly an aeroplane. Not very far, I don't think, but nevertheless, she was the first one to take flight and land. She looks like somebody you wouldn't argue with to me, but there
Yeah.
you go. Okay. Next lady, this is Marie Curie. The first woman to win the Nobel Prize. She won it for physics in 1903 with her husband, and in 1911 she won it for chemistry. Dedicated her life to research and came to an early death because of the exposure to radiation that had been part of her studies. But a very important person to all of us, I think, probably
Absolutely.
one of the
She's on my list.
most influential women in the world. And quite a modest person, apparently. She was kind of, don't know, she lived quite modestly, and, there was no airs and graces about it. She was just good at her job. Okay. Sorry if I'm rattling, but I've kind of run out of time here. This is Gertrude Edel. I think that's how you pronounce it, but it may not be true. Born in 1906, died in 2003 at the age of 97. So there you are, the benefits of swimming. I think she spent some time out of the water, but she was born in New York. She was Olympic champion, world record holder in 5 events. This is quite something, really, isn't it? Nowadays they tend to swim freestyle or backstroke or whatever, but she did 5 lots. And there was, at the time, it was said that no woman could possibly swim the English Channel. And she had 3 goes at it, and in 1926 she managed to do it, and she was the first woman to do so. So there you go. Okay, who's this? Anybody off us? Hello?
Ada Lovelace.
Ada Lovelace, that's right, yeah. The daughter of Lord Byron, mathematical genius, basically the mother of computers and the algorithm. She worked a lot with Charles Babbage. And pretty much, she was home educated. She didn't go to school or anything, but they, at an early age, they discovered she had a genius for mathematics, and so she sort of laid the foundations which we benefit from today. Okay. This lady is called Vigdis Finnbogadottir. She was born in 1930, worked a lot in the women's movement, and she became the first female leader to be democratically elected. And she was the president of Iceland from 1980 to 1996. But obviously there had been other women leaders, but she was the first one to be democratically elected. Okay. Who was the first woman MP in the UK?
The American woman. What was the name?
Nancy Astor, yes?
Yes.
Well, she wasn't actually the first woman to be elected. The first woman to be elected was Constance Markovich, who was an aristocrat, but she was a revolutionary, nationalist, suffragist, socialist, and she was elected for Dublin South in 1918. and until 22. But because she was a member of Sinn Féin, she never took a seat in the House. So although Nancy Astor is credited with being the first, she was the first to sit, but this lady was the first to be elected. Okay. Okay. How's your DNA?
Is that Rosalind Franklin?
It is, yes.
Yeah, that was who I was going to talk about this morning.
Okay.
I admire her greatly.
Okay. Well, she had a short life. She was only 38 when she died in 1920. Anyway, do you want to say something about her, Jackie, instead of me?
Well, I haven't got loads of details, but she was actually the first person to photograph the double helix. And Watson and Crick are credited with the discovery of DNA, but in actual fact, they used her photos. I see she's holding one of her photos in her hand there, and they somehow or other got hold of her work. They were researching in the same area, but it was actually Rosalind who did the first X-rays that showed the double helix.
Okay.
But she didn't get credited with it for reasons we know.
But she's now more celebrated than she was at the time of her death, isn't she?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I love this picture. I don't know why. She looks
like that's gorgeous.
Angela Burdett Coutts. Oh, she's quite a girl. In 1837, she inherited £1.8 million from her grandfather, which is the equivalent of 170 million in today's money. And she was a friend of Dickens and the Duke of Wellington. And she spent most of her money on scholarships, endowments, homes for fallen women. At the age of 67, she married a 29-year-old. So there you go. That's
Hey.
Good for her.
reminded me of Sandy's poem, but there you go. But she had to, when she got married, because he was an American, she had to give up 2/3 of her fortune to her sisters or her siblings or whatever. But she was still left with a few. But she did spend it on other people most of the time. So, and obviously, presumably the related Boots family, the bankers. But there you go. And she was the first woman to be made a baroness in her own right by Queen Victoria. But they were for all her good works. Quick, moving on. We all know who this is. Yes,
Laurie.
Yeah.
Florence Nightingale. You may know who she was and what she did. Okay, but probably less celebrated is Marie Seacole, who has more recently been celebrated. A lady, she was from Kingston, Jamaica. She came over to Europe, quite an adventurous in her own way. And although she met Florence Nightingale at Scutari, Mary Seacole didn't stay in the hospital. She made her. She went to the front line to look after the injured troops there. So she was, but she sort of paved the way for, I guess, diversity in nursing. A high proportion of our medical people these days are from.
When I first started nursing, I was mentored by a Jamaican lady called Mrs. Matthews. I never knew her first name, but she was wonderful. Yeah, my very first experience, really.
Well, with Mary Seacole, they wouldn't let her join the nurses, would they? She actually went out under her own steam.
Yeah, she was quite a feisty lady. She was kind of
Didn't she have a hotel or a bar or something that doubled as a hospital?
She had all kinds. She wasn't just a nurse. She had quite a life.
No, she was quite a character.
But she now has a statue, doesn't she? Okay. Fry's Turkish Delight. This is Elizabeth Fry, 1780 to 1846. She was driving force in legislation to improve the treatment of prisoners, especially women, and she was mostly responsible for the 1823 Jails Act. She herself had 11 children, which kind of figures quite a lot in some of these women. They're either one of 11 children or they had 11 of their own. I don't know why 11 is such a famous number, but there you are. She was from a wealthy family, but she was a great philanthropist and worker for better life for ordinary people. I think she was, the Fry bit is connected to the Bristol chocolate people, and her family were also the founders of, or the forefathers of Barclays Bank. But there you are. This is what she said: punishment is not for revenge, but to lessen crime and reform the criminal. Nice idea. Okay, over to you again, Jackie.
That's Mary Anning, and she grew up in a very poor family in whatever the name of the place is. And she used to go out onto the beach collecting fossils, which she and her father sold in their shop. And she discovered all sorts of fossils. And the first, I've forgotten what it's called now. A lot of men from the museum in London came down and bought her fossils for peanuts. And then, of course, they were all acclaimed as great discoverers of fossils. And this was at a time when Darwinism was coming in. So it was actually quite controversial. And people accused her of taking skeletons from animals like crocodiles and putting them together.
She lived from, she lived in Lyme Regis, actually.
That's it, yes.
1799 to 1847. This is Nellie Bly, who you may or may not have heard of, whose real name was Elizabeth Cochrane Seaman, and she was a journalist in America. And she's very, maybe not so much in the UK, but she's very influential in the women's movement in America. Born in 1864, died in 1922, and she was responsible for the reform of divorce laws, the lives of working women, conditions for factory workers, especially women. So she was quite important in America. I'm rushing now because I've got no time left, so forgive me. And this is one you may or may not have heard of. Sacagawea. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a lovely picture. Who lived for only 24 years between 1788 and 1812. And she was, there's an expedition, Lewis and Clark expedition across the United States from the Mississippi to the Pacific. And she was the guide and translator. And she was also established lots of cultural contacts with the Native Americans and the natural history of different regions. So she's quite celebrated in America. But she was in fact bought at the age of 13 and sold to a Frenchman as his wife, which sounds pretty horrendous, but actually turned out to be okay, an okay guy after all that. But nevertheless, she only managed 24 years, but she had managed to make her name remembered. Okay, this is all you tired actresses. Who's this?
Terry, is it? No.
Sorry?
It's not Ellen Terry. No.
No, it's Sarah Bernhardt.
Bernhardt, the other one.
Who was born in 1844 and 1923, probably the biggest superstar of her day. Profligate, and she had to keep touring the world to keep paying for all her pleasures or whatever else. In 1915, she'd hurt her leg so many times playing Tosca, jumping off the battlements, that she went to a surgeon and told him to take it off, because she felt it would be easier on a wooden leg than the pain that she was getting as she was.
Oh, gosh.
So she had the operation and she carried on acting for a bit. Well, apparently nowadays it could have been easily sorted, the problem, but nevertheless. But she was like the first superstar. Anyway, there you go. Oh, that's a picture of a program of her when she appeared in Manchester. She appeared, I remember if I did that theatre talk yonks ago, she was. Okay. Helen Keller lost her sight on a hearing at age 19 months.
Ichthyosaurus.
First deaf-blind person to gain a degree at Radcliffe, after Harvard University. And she worked around the globe most of her life in causes for people with sight loss. She wrote 14 books. Rosa Parks, you remember?
Yep.
Yeah, well, she was in prison. Well, she was arrested for not picking up a seat on the bus, even the last. So there you go. She was kind of one of the important figure in American civil rights. Hattie McDaniel, first black woman to win an Oscar.
Wow.
For Gone with the Wind in 1939. She was not allowed to attend the premiere of Gone with the Wind in Atlanta because it was an all-white cinema. At the Oscar ceremony, she was sat at a side table, segregated side table, even though she won the Oscar. This is only 1939, remember. But there you go. She was the first woman to. Not sure that things are that much different nowadays, to be honest. But there you go. And lastly, but not Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, 1836 to 1917. First woman to qualify as a physician and a surgeon. She was the second of 11 children, but she is, important in the history of medicine in the UK, as we all know. There is a Elizabeth Garrett Anderson Hospital in London named after women's ailments. She was the sister of Millicent Fawcett. I never knew that. I only found that out. Millicent Fawcett was the suffragette. She was a suffragist, and now has a statue in Parliament Square. Is one of the important people in getting votes for women. There you go. So obviously they were quite a, I don't know, advanced family for their years. There you go.
I thought it was interesting.
It was Ichthyosaurus.
Right.
Ichthyosaurus.